Welcome to Under Two Capes. I'm Jared, and we have another guest. We have Dawson. How do you pronounce your last name?
Wiedrich.
All right, Wiedrich from the Four Nerds Network. Dawson, welcome to Under Two Capes.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate the invite, and it's always fun to collaborate with new people and get to know fellow nerds. So it's good to be here.
All right, and so I also in addition to being a fellow nerd, he's also a fellow Snyder fan, and those of the
Yes.
podcast know that the Snyder stuff is A, the impetus behind this show, and B,
Mhm.
my most popular content. The video I put up for the Oscar thing is like at 850 views, and I'm like, the heck?
Sometimes some things resonate with people more, I guess, and that was a big topic. So,
Oh yeah. So let's get normally I always have like a holistic questions. I always ask new guests. So let's get into that. What got you into comics?
ooh, great question. I've been into art my whole life. I've
Mhm.
always been into drawing, sketching, and just the art of creating images that speak to people. And comics, of course, deal a lot with illustration. That's a big part of it. And I remember when I first picked up a comic book, it was at a public library when I was like 8 years old. And my mom would take us there to like just rent movies, or like she'd go and talk to some friends she had there. And I'd go in this back room where they had this rack of comics. And one of the first comics that I ever picked up and actually read through was Batman Superman by Jeff Loeb, illustrated by Michael Turner. I believe it was issue number
Was that the Supergirl
8.
one?
Yeah, the Supergirl one.
I
Yep.
love that book. Didn't they
Yep.
make an animated movie about that?
I think they made two of them. They made one about the Supergirl, and made one about Public Enemies.
Yeah. Both of them
From
were better than the comics a little bit, I think.
a little bit, but I there's a special place in my heart for that
Yeah, yeah.
Jeff Loeb run, of course. But that was one of the first comics I ever read, along with Marvel Adventures Spider-Man from the early 2000s. Those things really got me into it because my family wasn't necessarily a comic book family. We're more
Mhm.
sports oriented because my dad was a
Mhm.
football coach, and that really just got me more interested in that world. And as you can see now, I'm
Yeah,
definitely much more into that than I was as a kid. So,
that's great. Yeah, for me it was the old JLU cartoon. So
mm,
that was I always watch that. No, that's also why like the Justice League is like my main comic that I read like all the time, because it's like
right.
I always say, first off, team books are great ways to get people into comic books because it's a sampling of all the different characters. And DC, I think, has the better team. That's
Yeah,
just my
I can
opinion.
agree because like it has some of the most interesting characters, right? And just like you said, if you see the team up books, you can see, okay, I like this character more. Let's explore their books a little bit. It
Yeah,
makes you helps you
exactly.
pick and choose what's more your style.
Mhm. This next question, I get the feeling looking at your setup that I already know the answer to this, but DC or Marvel, which one's better?
Better. Oh, now which one I like more
Yeah,
is DC. I'm a big DC guy.
I
Um,
figured.
right. I mean, obviously, got a little DC stuff. I have a whole rack of just Batman right here. This whole rack right here is just Batman. Um, I do like a little bit of Marvel. My main Marvel guys are Daredevil, Spider-Man, and a little bit of X-Men and Wolverine. But I'm definitely more of a DC guy for sure.
Of course, of course. And that's
Yeah.
it's because I think DCA has more like well known in terms of like when you think of like famous comic book storylines.
Mhm.
Honestly, I really think of DC more because you got like Dark Knight Returns, All Star Superman, Watchmen. It's like all of the
Right.
greats mostly are DC.
Right. No, you're absolutely right. I mean, there's some Marvel ones here and there that stand out, but DC overall definitely has the more influential stories. Like you go to all the different Crisis events,
Oh
right?
yeah,
You go all the different Batman stories. Batman alone has some of the best comic book stories, period.
because they published
And
80 books of him.
yeah, I mean that every now and then you're gonna have something good, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Um,
It's statistically possible something good is gonna get in there.
right. And even like Green Lantern has had some really good stories that overshadow
Jeff
some things from
Johns.
Marvel. Yeah. I mean, unfortunately, yes, Jeff Johns, right?
Well,
Um,
yeah.
right. But you know what I mean? So yeah, DC, I think as far as being a more legacy type of comic universe, I think DC definitely takes the cake just because their characters have been more iconic. Like the second most known symbol around the world, besides the cross or crucifix of Jesus Christ, is the Superman logo.
Yeah.
That is the second most known symbol around the world.
Yes,
So that
exactly.
speaks for itself.
Yeah, and also whenever people tell me, ask me, Jared, who would win, Avengers or Justice League? Well, Avengers, most of their people have no powers, and the Justice League alone has Superman and Wonder Woman. I'm like, yeah, pretty much the only people that I think could possibly at least fight the Justice League would be the X-Men, but even then, I think that the League still wins it.
Yeah, the X-Men, the Hulk would give him some problems. Ant-Man would give him some problems here and there, but the Flash and Superman are both fast enough to handle anything that he does. And Batman's just, he's freaking Batman.
Yeah, that's all you have to say.
Yeah, it'd be a tough fight, but yeah, the Justice League would win.
Yeah, exactly. Now, favorite comic event or storyline or whatever.
I have a lot of different favorites. This one might be a controversial one, though. Probably my favorite comic book storyline right now, because I've read through it so much recently and I just love it, is The Dark Knight Master Race.
I love that book. You kidding me?
It's phenomenal. I mean, with Andy Kubert and some parts illustrated by Frank Miller as well. I mean, I love that book to death. I almost love it more than the original Dark Knight Returns.
It's very supremely underrated.
Very. I mean, I have a lot of different people that I talk to, and it's very much not a story that is talked about enough, honestly, just because of all the things that it does. In fact, it has, and I've said this on many different podcasts, but one of my favorite comic book panels of all time is in The Dark Knight Master Race. It is when the head priest of the Kandorians is basically like giving the world an ultimatum, saying like, what is your response? What is your answer to this? And Batman chimes in over this monitor and says, go to hell. And it's just a big page of him.
Yeah, and he's like, all of the monitors go to hell. I'm like, yes.
That's one of my favorites of all time, just because of how awesome and BA it is. And it's an old, grizzled Batman just saying like, yeah, no, it ain't going to fly here, buddy. I just love that. So Dark Knight Master Race is one of my all-time favorites. I mean, there's plenty I could talk about. I mean, Watchmen, of course.
Yes, of course.
Obviously, it's up there.
Doomsday Clock.
Doomsday Clock. Yeah, that's also a little underrated, I feel like. I love that one. Trying to think. Hush. I love that one. Those were one of the first ones I fully collected. I can go on and on to different stories, but,
I will say
there's so many great ones.
My I have two absolute favorite panels from Master Race. It's the Batman one, and it's the one where Superman and Wonder Woman first reunite and they're making out as she's covered in blood.
Yeah,
because I'm like, that perfectly encapsulates that Wonder Woman.
Yeah, no, that's very true. Very much a warrior. She doesn't give a crap. She's willing to just
as he's holding his infant child.
Yeah,
I'm like, well,
it's Frank Miller for you. Frank Miller's like, he's heavy metal, dude, and he goes for it. So you got to respect him. He's
one of my favorite writers of all time, just because because he doesn't care. He'll put like whatever he needs to make a good storyline. Often like a certain movie director that you and I both enjoy.
Yeah, exactly. Although there was one time that I do think Frank Miller fell short, and that was All-Star Batman and Robin.
Yeah.
But we don't have to get into that too much.
The art was great. The Jim Lee art was good. The storyline, compared to the rest in the Dark Knight universe, it's not the best.
I will make the argument, though, that I think if Frank Miller had illustrated that story himself, it would have been received a little bit better.
Mm-hmm.
Because although Jim Lee's art is amazing in it, his art and Frank Miller's writing style just don't mix.
That's true. I can see that. Now, my question is, which one do you think is worse? All-Star Batman and Robin or The Dark Knight Strikes Again?
I think All-Star Batman and Robin is worse. I actually kind of have a soft spot in my heart for Strikes Again. It's not a great story, but it has all that Frank Miller flair and flavor, and so I think it gets a little bit of a bad rap, but it's definitely not as good as The Dark Knight Returns, because, I mean, that's The Dark Knight Returns.
Only thing I don't like about Dark Knight Returns 2, as I call it, is the Catgirl outfit. I'm like, oh, that's kind of creepy.
Agreed. It is really creepy. And then the girls who are dressed up as, like, superheroes who, like, report the news, and one of them's, like, super into innuendos and stuff. I'm just like...
Yeah. I'm like...
I can do without that.
Yeah. I'm like, okay, dude. Now, on a related note, all right, now, which couple makes more sense, Wonder Woman and Batman or Wonder Woman and Superman?
I think Wonder Woman and Superman.
Yes, thank you.
I say that very lightly because I'm one of the people that I don't like when superhero teammates date for the most part. I mean, that's a good story. I like
That's
that
a
book
really good
though.
one.
I tend to not be for these superhero people like dating each other just because they have their own separate worlds that they live in. They have these different people they can interact with. But they're the couple that makes the most sense just because they're both basically gods on this earth. They can relate to one another. Whenever the world turns against them, they can understand each other. So in that way, I feel like it makes a little more sense. Whereas Wonder Woman and Batman, like, nah.
The only
I
reason
just
why
don't
that's
see that.
popular is because of the Bruce Timm universe. That's the only reason why I'm convinced.
Yeah, pretty
Which
much. That makes sense to me.
here's why I don't take Bruce Timm as a good indicator of like a couples, because he's the one that put Batman and Batgirl. So I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah. So anything like really recommended promoted by him, I'm like, okay, that doesn't work. Plus the fact it's like even Frank Miller admits that they work better because that's the couple in his book.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much.
Except
I get it. I just,
it's a more like a murderous version of Wonder Woman, but that's besides the point.
yeah, for sure.
I do say I love in All-Star Batman and Robin, as much as that story is derided, where Superman and Wonder Woman are like arguing about whether or not to go kill Batman, and then she
just
just
randomly
kisses
him.
I'm like, oh, and then she pushes him away and goes, "I hate you all." And then Superman's like, "She's a really nice girl." I'm like,
Frank Miller has such an interesting take on that relationship because he also explores that in Superman Year One with John Romita Jr.
Yeah,
Where Superman meets Batman and Wonder Woman, and like Superman's kind of a player for some reason.
yeah.
And
I'm like,
yeah, but like he's explored that in so many different facets, with Wonder Woman just kind of like just being attracted to him for no reason and then pushing him away saying she hates him. And then in that book, just being, smitten by him because he's somehow good with the ladies.
So I'm like,
yeah,
they just met. So that's the only book where I think it doesn't work because of that reason. Well, here's the thing: none of all the romances were really, really, really forced in that book.
Oh, I mean, that's pretty much the same
Lana.
with a lot of different. Yeah, with Lana, true. Lana was pretty good, but that's kind of the same with a lot of comic book romances, honestly. And even in like comic book movies, I'm very much known to say that most comic book movie relationships, in my opinion, are very forced. Like most of the early Batman movies relationships. Yeah, very
Thanks
much
a lot,
so.
Joss Whedon.
Seriously. But the early Batman movies were very guilty of that. Then you had, of course, Avengers Endgame with Hulk and Black Widow. The only two romances that I think have actually worked in comic book movies are Andrew Garfield and Emma Stone's Peter and Gwen Stacy, obviously, because they have great chemistry, and somewhat Robert Pattinson and Zoe Kravitz as Batman and Catwoman.
Yeah, that was fantastic. I was like, all right, yeah, I'll take it.
I mean, Henry Cavill and Amy Adams was okay, but those other two relationships far and away are superior to them, in my opinion.
But I loved how in the Batman movie, a lot of the shots were straight up recreations from Tom King's Batman run. So I'm like,
yeah.
Even though I'm not the biggest fan of Tom King, I will admit when he has some really cool panels.
Yeah, I mean, Tom King's one of those that's kind of hit and miss, although probably one of the greater panels in Batman comics that he actually wrote was the whole night after night they tell me, oh, you're finished, Batman. It's over, Batman. Well, guess what? I'm still here. I love that panel. It's great.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I love that. All right, next one. Most underrated comic book movie or TV series?
Most underrated. I would say, I mean, I could talk about the Snyder stuff all day long.
Oh,
it's very underrated. But as far as like severely underrated, in my opinion, I'm going to have to go on the Marvel side of the pond for this one. Amazing Spider-Man 2.
That's an interesting pick.
Yeah, because like it's not a popular pick, but I personally love that movie. I think it's honestly my favorite Spider-Man movie ever.
I mean, the Green Goblin was kind of iffy, but I'm like,
I rewatched it this past year, and like I'm actually okay with it because
in terms of the looks is what I'm talking about. In terms of the actual look of the Green Goblin.
Looks is fair, although I kind of justify them in my mind as like, well, he's supposed to kind of look like a grotesque monster. I mean, he's supposed to be a goblin after all, so I kind of justify it that way. But I feel like that one's heavily underrated, and I feel like that one got way too bashed back in 2012. And I have a theory. I feel like that was more forced bashing because Disney wanted to acquire Spider-Man for the MCU and they didn't want to use Andrew Garfield. So that definitely could have come into play there. You're seeing something very similar with Morbius right now, even though Morbius isn't nearly as good as Amazing Spider-Man 2. But Disney's shady like that, so they're not unwilling to do things like that.
The rumor is that they pressured the Academy to have that to start that Oscar fan favorite category. And what I find is hilarious, they did it so Marvel
They
movies
didn't
could
win.
win Oscars, and guess what? DC just like, nope, mine.
I do love that.
When you see the movies that the Snyder Cut beat first, Endgame, The Matrix 1, did not see that one coming. I was like, that was in contention.
Yeah,
Like,
I mean that
like way back in the day.
seriously, that was kind of a random pick for them, but yeah, seeing that win overall was pretty dang good.
I would have also been happy if the three Spider-Man from No Way Home won, because that was fantastic. As someone that grew up on the Tobey Maguire movies.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, when I was in the theater and I saw both Toby and Andrew show up, I flipped my lid. Absolutely, I would have loved to see that win too. Although, again, seeing Snyder win something, is just nice.
Particularly when one of the executives that was very anti-Snyder was in the thing. It was part of the team that sabotaged the Justice League.
Yes.
And by the way, on the show, whenever I refer to a Justice League, I just say that's the Snyder Cut, because that's the only version of Justice League that exists.
That is fair enough.
It's like whenever we say I'm going to watch Batman versus Superman, we're not talking about the theatrical cut.
Yeah, Ultimate Edition, of course.
Which is funny because I tell people, whenever someone tells me that like BVS is a horrible movie, I'm like, did you see the theatrical cut or the ultimate cut? 9 times out of 10,
a good question.
9 times out of 10, they'll say the theatrical cut, and I'm like, watch the ultimate cut. It explains it.
I've literally said those exact same words like 50 million times over the past couple of years. Like, watch the Ultimate Edition of BVS. It's a far better movie. In fact, my older brother, he's not very much into comic book stuff, but I was living with him for a bit, and I told him, we're going to watch the Ultimate Edition of Batman v Superman, and I'm going to explain some things to you and help you understand how deep this movie is.
Yeah.
And by the end of the runtime, he was like, that was a way deeper movie than I gave it credit for. And I was like, right? Like, thank you.
Yeah, exactly. I did an episode with Enosh from Poindexter Lounge, and we were talking about defending Batman versus Superman, and you could
Right.
And what we did is we pulled up an article from that time period of all the criticisms of BVS. I thought he was going to have an aneurysm for a second there. He's like, oh my gosh, how many of these do we have to go through? There's a lot of these things. It's like, why are Superman and Lois Lane in love? Why they want to know how did like Superman how did Lois Lane find out all that stuff about Lex Luthor? I'm like, how long do you want this movie to be?
Yeah,
you can explain. But back then you couldn't do a 3-hour to 4-hour movie.
Yeah, which is unfortunate because Zack was ahead of the game on that department. But yeah, no, whenever I see complaints about that, like I know Enosh and I have talked very much about that too, just outside of streams, and the amount of headaches we have just thinking about how people misunderstood things from that movie. It's just like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, the Martha moment. I'm like, I understood that.
Yeah. I mean, when I first saw it, I was a little confused, but then like I looked into it and watched it again. I was like, oh, this makes sense. Like it works. Like people aren't willing to put in that mental effort though, which is the unfortunate thing.
It's because of Marvel movies. And I've always said Marvel movies ruin superhero movies because now everyone wants them to be these joke fests. And
they want to be joke fest, and they want to be pretty simple, and
yeah.
And you know that has its place somewhere, but it doesn't mean that the other side of the spectrum can't exist, right? You can't. You can have simple ones. You can also have ones that are more complex. It's like with comic books, you can have simple stories like the more modern Batman, Superman stories. It's pretty cut and dry. You're facing off against a villain. It's kind of wacky. Or you could have stuff like Watchmen or some of the darker or more psychological stories, where you can explore those things. Like you can have both sides of the spectrum, but a lot of movie-going audiences somehow don't understand that.
Yeah, and it's like whenever I look at the criticisms for any of the DC movies, inevitably there will be one comment that says it's not like a Marvel movie, and I'm like, well, that's kind of the point.
I mean, it's not Marvel, it's DC.
It's DC. It's better, actually.
Yeah, in my opinion, yeah.
I was one of the few people that was arguing that Zack's film universe is better than the MCU.
I mean, at the time, you could probably argue that. I mean, the studio was definitely trying to sabotage things, but it's funny. There was a time back in like 2015, 2016 where that debate, both sides had logic to it, right? But now the DCU has had struggles and they've, kicked Zack's stuff to the side. And it's like, well, now it's kind of obvious which one has more success because MCU has like more than 20 films and the DCU is still struggling to get to 15 at this point.
When
Maybe.
they could have had a cinematic universe had they not sabotaged it. We would have been done by 2020.
Yeah,
I'm
seriously.
like, well, what are you guys doing? And you would have had a pretty dope storyline. I'm like, what are you guys doing here?
It's the classic reactionary mentality of
Yeah.
not getting the immediate rewards that you think that you should, instead of looking at what you have and working with it, right?
Yeah, because none of Zack's movies flopped. They still made money and a pretty good amount of money, but they were like, well, it didn't make $1 billion. Neither did your first couple of Marvel movies.
I mean, Zack's, I guess he had Man of Steel, BVS, and Wonder Woman all made way more money than the first MCU films did.
Yeah.
But they didn't think like that. They were like, oh, well, the MCU is cranking out these almost $1 billion projects every time. It's like, yeah, because they've established themselves. Mm-hmm. You're in the process of establishing yourself. So be patient and wait. And then maybe $1 billion is on the horizon.
Because I guarantee you, JL2 would have made $1 billion because it featured the entire DC universe and a way cooler version of the Green Lantern Corps against Darkseid. Yeah, that would have made $1 billion.
that would have drawn a lot of audiences for sure. 100%.
Particularly, it would have been great. I really hope that when when we get those movies, because I'm still like confident that we're gonna at least get those other two. That it would be great if Zack brings back Ryan Reynolds as Green Lantern.
See, I'm not personally for that because I didn't like his Green Lantern movie. But if he did it, I wouldn't be like angry. Like I'd be like, whatever. But
I felt he was a good. But like this way, I like his Jon Stewart a lot more because Jon Stewart's my dude.
Yeah, Jon Stewart's a great pick to have in this universe as Justice League. All
right. What inspired you to start YouTubing?
Oh, that's a good question. I started YouTube back in 2019, 3 years ago now. Holy crap. At the time, my little brother, he's now a junior in high school, but at the time he was a freshman, and he really started getting the idea of content creation because he always wanted to like either be a director or produce things. Like he's always been in the creative mindset of entertainment, And so he started a YouTube channel and he talked about comic books, right? And at the time I was, dating my wife. We were acquiring this house before we got married. And, I was looking for a way to kind of explore all the different hobbies that I have because, I'm an artist. I'm a somewhat part-time musician. I've kind of not done as much of that as I would like to. But I have a lot of different interests. And so I was like, what's a good way to explore all these and just kind of, vocalize them? And I was like, oh, why not try YouTube? So I started that out, and over time just kind of developed into a weekly thing where I talk about movie news and stuff and nerdy topics. And then eventually the Four Nerds thing started up back like 2 years ago during like the height of the Snyder Cut stuff before it was announced. And then all of a sudden it was announced and the Four Nerds really hit its stride. And then with the channel, it was originally called Nerdy in Many Ways. Mm-hmm. After a while, I had started this job to where I just didn't have a lot of time to do things. And so I was like, you know what? I'm not going to be able to punch out content as much as I'd like to. So what I could do is consolidate everything that I'm doing onto a network called the Four Nerds Network, which is why the show's on there now every week. I'll do like a drawing stream on there every now and then. Occasionally we'll have our good friend Philip Barker from Superhero Stress and The Eternal Night go on there and talk about movies. So yeah, my little brother definitely inspired me a lot in that. He doesn't do YouTube much anymore, but it was just a good influence to get me to voice out about the stuff that I love. So
awesome. Now let me ask you this: where were you when the Snyder Cut was announced?
I was I was in my in-laws' spare room that was operating as my part-time office at the time. Mm-hmm. It's funny, you have one of those like little folding tables, mm-hmm. right? I had one of those. I had my little laptop set up. I was doing a live reaction stream to the Man of Steel watch party. And Henry Cavill came on, and I flipped my lid, and then they announced it, and I just freaking screamed. And my in-laws aren't really into the whole superhero thing. So like I ran around the house, I was like, the Snyder Cut's coming out. And they're like, yay, good job. And I was like, I didn't do anything, but it's great.
I'm gonna say this. I was at a dentist appointment when it got announced. I went in, it hadn't been announced yet. I come out, I'm checking Facebook, and then the Jurassic Park meme of like Dr. Ian Malcolm going, that SOB did it, came up. And I'm like, okay, what? And then I see the black and white Wonder Woman post that says Zack Snyder's Justice League, and I'm like, wait, what? How long was I in the dentist appointment? Because up until that point, I was like, there's no way this is happening. And then I'm like, what?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. And then I remember, I believe it was Daniela, the girl who asked him the question when we released the Snyder Cut. While I was doing that live reaction stream, I had a couple different people message me saying like, hey, pay attention to her. Like, pay attention to what she does. I don't know how they knew this, but they did. And so I was watching, and then she came up on screen. I was like, okay, hold on, this got to be it. And then she asked, and then Zack did his whole like thing where it's like, oh, you know, it's not up to me, but how about this? And it shows it. I was like, what? Oh, I freaked out.
I love all the reactions on the internet of that happening, because that was like almost like that was almost as big as like the Avengers Endgame moment where everyone comes through the portals.
I mean, it's like it was the unreleasable movie, right?
Yeah,
exactly. It was the pipe dream. It was the movie that didn't exist. I mean, it was a internet myth for so long. And yeah, there it is. I have the trilogy pack back there on my shelf.
I still have to get that.
Oh, it's so good. It has like the little posters for the characters. And even has a little poster of the anti-life equation. Yeah. But I mean, it was just such an epic moment that it was something that didn't exist, would never come out, and it was coming out. And you couldn't have asked for anything better. It was just cool.
One thing I wasn't expecting is the critical reaction to the Snyder Cut. Like, everyone was like, I'm sorry I ever said anything negative about Zack Snyder. And I'm like, that's what we've been telling you.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I remember when it came out and I watched and I saw the different reactions online. And there's a lot of people who said, oh, this makes this part in BVS or Man of Steel make more sense. And I'm like, I've been telling people ever since Man of Steel came out, they're like, what about these questions that I have? I was like, well, I'm sure they'll answer in a following movie. And then BVS came out. I was like, okay, let's present new questions. Like, okay, it'll be answered in a following movie. That's kind of how a long-running story arc works.
Yeah.
Questions are answered in the subsequent film or entry to the story. And it still boggles my mind that people still say that, like, oh, this movie left questions, so therefore it's bad. It's like, no, wait a second. Wait till the next entry, and maybe your questions will be answered. And if not, just continue to search. Like, it's the problem.
It's called being a fan, because when a movie keeps you talking about it, that's actually a good idea.
Yeah. When a movie creates a conversation, or when a story creates a conversation, it's done its job. Right?
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
I don't like stories that you just simply read and you're just like, all right, that's it. On to the next. No, I like something that I can chew on. I like something that I can discuss and dissect. That's why I love BVS Ultimate Edition so much, because I can still rewatch that movie to this day and find new things that I didn't see before and discuss new topics and new symbolism that I hadn't noticed in previous watches.
It's because Zack crammed so much in this movie that I'm like, you fit all this in here. I'm like, wow.
It's a feast, both visually, thematically, symbolically. It really is. Like, I remember, what was it, last year? I was rewatching through BVS again, and the scene or the dream where Bruce goes to his parents' tomb, right? And there's this little stained glass image of like an angel in a city on fire. And I hadn't noticed it before. I was like, holy crap, that's how Bruce sees himself. He sees himself as this angel of vengeance in a city that's on fire. And then the next couple seconds, he sees this bat creature jump out of him, and that's how he really is now.
You could also take that as Zack hinting at Superman being a bad guy in the nightmare future.
You could also definitely take that for sure. I mean, there's whole different ways that you can take it, and that's what a good storyteller does. Is it gives you different perspectives and it allows you to think in different ways about something. Like 5 different people can look at the same image and come away with something different. That's what good art does.
Yeah.
I majored in art in college, and I took a lot of different art history courses. And our professor would show us a very popular piece of art. And they'd ask us, okay, what does this painting mean to you? And everyone in the class came up with something different.
Yeah.
And that's what good art does. And that's what I think Zack does a really great job of. Am I saying that Zack's like Da Vinci or something? No. But I'm saying he accomplishes something to a similar effect.
Yeah, exactly. I think a lot of the criticism that I think Zack gets is just people that don't like him, because I've seen people that are like, It's because I'm on Twitter. I see what people put down about
Right.
it. And what's kind of funny, I love when they critique Zack for doing for a creative choice, but then praise the creative choice in a different movie. And I'm like,
Right.
he
It's
did the
just the
same
person
thing.
involved. That's all it is.
Yeah, that's why I don't accept those arguments. So I'm like, okay, you know
Right.
what? If you're not going to have an actual productive conversation, because if you generally just don't like Zack's takes on the DC characters, that's fine. You're not
Yeah.
a lot. You don't have to like my to like the same stuff I do. But if you're just
Right.
not liking him because it's Zack Snyder, then I'm like, okay, whatever.
Right. It's like there's all these different things that the early DCU took straight out of the comics, and a lot of these comics are comics that people rather enjoyed,
Dark
right?
Knight
And
Returns.
Dark Knight Returns, and so many different others, especially Superman stories, right?
Mm-hmm.
Ones where he's like questioning his role in the world and questioning like how people are accepting him, and very popular stories. And yet, when Man of Steel approaches that same concept, they're all like, "Hold on, no, I don't like this." It's like, "Well, you like this in the book. What's the difference?"
It could be in the book that I love the people. Superman wouldn't kill General Zod. He always does.
Yeah, in the books, he also did in Superman 2. In fact, in Superman 2, he did it while smiling,
Yeah, exactly.
which is almost more
And
brutal.
my favorite is, Batman wouldn't kill. Yeah, he does. I argue that I argue that if you look at his publication history, Batman always kills.
He has killed many times. Then people try to say, like, well, why can't I be like Michael Keaton? It's like, are you freaking kidding me? I
He
mean,
put a
let me walk.
grenade down someone's pants.
Let me walk you through a scene in Batman 89 where Batman has the Batmobile drive into Axis Chemicals. When it's surrounded by Joker goons, he has the Batmobile drop bombs from the tires, killing all those Joker goons in the chemical facility as the Batmobile drives out. I mean, that's like
He
a
throws
good
the guy
solid
off
20
a cliff.
people.
He throws a dude off a mountain, off a rooftop, and just stares at him.
Yeah, I mean, it's so funny. People say like, "Oh, why can't we go to that Batman?" Is like, you do realize he killed more than Ben Affleck, right? More brutally than he did.
Even Christian Bale killed, because let me put it this way:
Yeah.
when he was fighting Ra's al Ghul, that's my favorite line where he goes, "I won't kill you, but I'm not going to save you. You're still killing him." What
I
type
mean,
of
that's
bat
pretty much
logic is
manslaughter.
that? What kind of bat logic is that?
It's just so funny. People will try to work their way around the whole Batman not killing thing, and like, let's, you know what? There are some stories where Batman not killing and having a rule, it works, right?
Yeah.
A lot of times it definitely does
Injustice.
work. Yeah, exactly. Injustice Under the Red Hood, like there's a lot of stories where it works thematically. But there's also other stories they try to shoehorn it in, and it tends to kind of make the story suffer a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are stories where Batman has killed, and the story ends up being more interesting because of it. Like, that's the thing people don't understand is that these characters have been written by hundreds of different writers over the years.
Yeah.
With different perspectives and different ideas in these characters. So yeah, there's going to be versions that are different, and people try to act like there's only one iteration. They act like these characters are historical figures that only lived a certain way.
Yeah, exactly.
When they're fictional characters that have been approached from different approaches. It's just fascinating.
Lord knows they change Wonder Woman's origin like every year practically.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, just give me definitive origin so I can so I can be done with it at this point.
Yeah, pretty much.
But I also love how people ignore the fact that take Zack's Batman. He was there for 20 years. Of course, he's going to be jaded and killing people. They ignore the context. Plus, the fact he was adapting a very specific Batman that people still like. By the way, like you said, everyone loves the Dark Knight Returns storyline, but they're like, I hate to see that in a live action movie. Yeah, I was not sold on Ben Affleck as Batman until that warehouse scene. Then I was like, okay, scene. Yeah, because it's an Arkham game at that point.
Pretty much. I mean, the way he goes into the rafters, how he fights people, hand-to-hand combat. I remember so many different conversations that I've had with people talking about the context of Ben Affleck's Batman, and they're talking about like, well, I don't understand like his mentality and everything. I was like, you literally don't have to go any further than the first couple sentences of dialogue in the movie to understand where he's coming from.
20 years in Gotham.
Well, no, that's later on, but the first few sentences of the movie where Bruce Wayne says there was a time above, a time before, there were perfect things, diamond absolutes, describing how he used to be. He's like, I used to be this hero, that I used to have this ideal, this rule. I used to be this picture perfect, squeaky clean hero, but things fall, things on earth, and what falls is fallen. Yeah. It's like I experienced the downfall, and now that I'm there, I'm bitter, I'm angry, it literally describes that character in the first 2 sentences, and yet people were confused. I don't understand how people can get confused when it's literally right there at the beginning.
My only problem with BVS on that note is the marketing, and here's what I mean by that. Can you imagine beyond the fact that they marketed the battle way too much and not the rest of the movie? But second off, so why was Wonder Woman in the trailer? Because can you imagine how much better it would be if you didn't see it coming? She's walking off the plane. She goes, Miss Prince. Every comic book fan in there would be like, oh, wait, what? And then she shows down, and then she like drops down. We have that awesome soundtrack for Wonder Woman.
It would have been a Captain America lifting Mjolnir moment in the theater. That's what it would have been if they had not put in the trailer. They definitely mismanaged a lot of the marketing. I will say the Turkish Airlines commercial was so good.
Yeah, that was
where it's Bruce Wayne in character and like visit Gotham City, and Lex Luthor's like, oh, rebuild Metropolis Project. Like, that's a good trailer. Mm-hmm. It gets you hyped. It gets you in the mindset of, hey, you're going to explore these worlds. It's not just a fighting movie. And there were a lot of missteps. And of course, that's all on Warner Brothers trying to do so many different things at the same time. But I will agree. That's definitely one pitfall of not necessarily the movie, but the experience of the movie being the marketing.
Yeah, I also love, speaking of the criticism of that movie, when people complain about how short the Batman versus Superman fight is. And I'm like, actually, if you read The Dark Knight Returns, the actual fight is not that long.
It's not long at all. There's only a couple of different things that Batman does, and then the fight's pretty much over.
And then Green Arrow just shoots a kryptonite arrow. That's it.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, heck, they do the same thing in BVS, and the fight even still lasts a little bit longer than it does in the book. So I don't know what more people wanted.
Yeah, it's because here's the thing. Going back to the marketing made it seem like the movie was just going to be the fight.
Right.
And I'm like, okay.
I don't know why people expected a 2.5-hour fight, but
yeah, I know. But, now let me ask you this: what's your favorite moment from the Snyderverse? I have a couple.
Favorite moment from the Snyderverse. That's a good one. First flight from Man of Steel is fantastic.
Oh yeah. Classic.
The whole Krypton sequence in Man of Steel as well.
I can't believe people criticize that. I'm like, what?
I know, it's freaking beautiful. It's Krypton like we've never seen, and it's this amazing alien world. Let's see here. The details in the fight in BVS where there's definite homages to The Dark Knight Returns. I love those things, like the grip mark from Superman's hand on his chest that's straight out of The Dark Knight Returns.
Plus, if you look at the smoke grenades, they actually have the lead chemical element. I'm like, that is so cool. Again,
like you have to know a little bit about chemicals a little bit to understand that, but it's a good Easter egg. It's like,
no one gives Zack enough credit for what he puts in this movie. Seriously,
there's that one, and then Steppenwolf's design in Zack Snyder's Justice League. I mean, just any scene that he's in, especially when he like kills that one Amazon on Themyscira with his axe.
Yeah,
like, it's like, dude, okay, that was pretty BA. And then when he flexes and breaks all the arrows, that's one part of the Snyder Cut where I watched the first time and I'm just like, oh, okay, we're in for a different Steppenwolf now.
I'm like, and we had Liam Neeson before, really? It was kind of funny. I watched it with a buddy recently. The Zack Snyder's. I haven't watched the Justice League in like years. Literally, probably since the year it came out, because I was just so traumatized. And then the Snyder Cut was announced. So I'm like, okay, why would I go back to that? But anyway, but it's like he turns to me when we're watching the Snyder Cut. He goes, Jared, did I ever explain in the Whedon cut why he keeps saying mother? And I go, no. I'm like,
no, that was just so freaking creepy. Another good moment in the Snyderverse is pretty much almost all of Ray Fisher's cyborg scenes.
Yes.
Like, oh my gosh, like his whole where he's figuring out what he can do, helping that one mother of the 2 children and with the money and stuff. And then, oh gosh, there's just so many good shots. And one of my favorite shots of the entire Snyderverse is when Doomsday and Superman are shooting their heat vision at each other.
Yes,
and it's like the wide vision.
It's that clash. Oh man,
it's literal art.
That's a comic book panel. I guarantee you, that's a comic book panel somewhere there.
Oh yeah, I mean, if it wasn't before, it definitely is now. Like someone has definitely saw it and be like, yes, I'm gonna draw that.
I love how the Zack Snyder's on the Justice League Steppenwolf design is now the canon like DC Comics design for Steppenwolf. I'm like, yeah, I'm like, and you keep telling me that Zack Snyder's designs are stupid. DC Comics is adapting it.
I mean, they made the Nightmare Batman suit in multiple ways. They made it for Batman Catwoman story, and they also used the trench coat design for Batman the Detective by Tom Taylor and Andy Kubert. And they've adapted all these different other things with the Snyderverse and designs and stuff. Like, you can't deny his movies have had an impact on the comics and just in DC in general. Like,
and now his Batmobile showed up in one of the Batman comics.
Yeah, which actually, funny enough, that comic was written by Jeff Johns. Which is funny.
I'm like, okay. Jeff Johns is one of those dudes. He is my favorite comic book writer, but that's a situation where you really have to separate the art from the artist.
Yeah, I agree. He's got some great comics. Like, I have his Aquaman omnibus right up here because he wrote a good Aquaman and stuff. But I do agree. It's one of those where you have to really separate the kind of slimeball that he is as a person from the stuff he's created, which is always like a conflict inside. But, you know, it is what it is.
Yeah. My favorite Snyderverse moments are the first flight. I will agree with you. That scene was fantastic. The first part, the first time the Trinity is together on screen.
Oh, of course.
And they have I was very nervous when Wonder Woman showed up because I was like, what's your theme going to sound like? And then it pipes in and I'm like, okay, there you go. I'm cool with that. I'm cool with that.
It's and so freaking heavy metal. I love it.
The clash of Superman and Doomsday with the heat vision. Yeah, that you just can't not beat that. And then going to the only version of Justice League that exists. I love the Steppenwolf part because that is the coolest version of Steppenwolf I think ever. I prefer that one over the comics, and that's not just because I'm a Zack Snyder fan, just because it looks more like alien and apocalyptic,
and it's intimidating.
Plus, it looks like he is realistically the uncle of Darkseid instead of just some dude.
Yeah, exactly.
And then my all-time favorite moment actually is the Steppenwolf is about to kill Cyborg, and I thought originally, okay, the tearing the leg off, that's what was going to happen. Then Superman shows up, and even the sound design, the axe hits and you hear a clang because he's the Man of Steel, and then he just goes, I'm not impressed, bro. And I'm like, and then the Justice League are like juggling him back and forth.
That's another thing. When I first watched the Snyder Cut, I thought that was going to happen too. I thought he was going to pick him up and like rip his leg off, because in the other terrible version of Justice League, when he rips his leg off, he can't really hear what Steppenwolf says. He's like says something, but you can't really understand what he's saying. And so I was like, okay, we're gonna find
to see the truth.
Well, before that, like when he's actually like ripping him apart,
he's like, that's true. He mumbles so much on that.
Yeah, and so I'm like, well, maybe they're gonna say something different here, but then they didn't do that at all. And I was like, okay, I'm down with this. Cool. Superman's here. Great. He's in the black suit. Awesome. Like,
and when you find out the black suit was actually visual effects, I'm like, oh, really?
I remember when I learned that when Zack talked about how, because I remember when I first watched the theatrical version of Justice League and I saw the Superman suit and I was like, why'd they do that? Because they detailed the muscles so much. Whereas in Man of Steel and BVS, they didn't do it nearly as much. I still mostly prefer the Man of Steel suit over all of them. But in BVS, they still went a little bit more musculature. And then the suit in Justice League, they went way overboard. It looks like it was white compared to the rest of the suit. I was like, why did they do that? I was so confused. And then he talked about a podcast how the studio wouldn't let him make a black suit. And I'm like, well, you know what? I'm just going to make it to where in VFX and post, they can just easily transfer it. So make the muscles more high defined. And I was like, that is brilliant. He was literally going to undercut the studio because they didn't want to give him what he wanted. He's like, you know what? Screw you guys. I'm going to add it in post.
My favorite,
brilliant.
That also goes into one of my favorite moments is when Superman is walking through the Kryptonian ship and you hear his two fathers. And then finally he's in the black suit, which my favorite is that if you look at the deleted scene from Justice League, the suit in the background is the black suit, but then in the other cut, in the actual canon cut of Justice League, it's the red suit. So I'm like, oh, okay, I see what you're doing there.
Yeah.
There were so many scenes. I took it as like a middle finger to Joss Whedon, like that one scene where they're all charging. And it's like slow motion. They're all doing their action poses. I was like, okay.
Oh, yeah. I sat there and I was like, you know what? Yes, this is the Justice League that I've been wanting. This is fantastic. This is the hero shot. I'll have it all day.
And then when you find out that like Junkie XL redid the entire soundtrack too. So I'm like,
oh my gosh. Because like they took out his score and then they had to redo it. Because I mean, obviously the one they had before was for a shorter runtime because that was a studio mandated thing. And so he's like, you know what? I have to extend it. I have to expand it. Let's just do it all again.
I just love the choice when Superman first returns. It starts off with the more triumphant like Superman theme, and then it gets into the scene from Man of Steel where the first flight theme. Yeah, and I'm like, okay, yeah, I'm liking this. I'm liking this.
Oh yeah, I like all. He
lasers off the horn. I'm like, oh, he's punching Steppenwolf and there's shock waves coming out, and I'm like, why isn't Superman always like this?
Seriously, that's the kind of Superman that I like reading about. A Superman that like fights for truth and justice, but isn't afraid to kick butt at the same time.
Yeah, I was having a debate with someone about they didn't like how brutal Superman was, and I'm like, first off, he's brutal in the comics, and second off, this is a very specific version of Superman that they're showing that he's susceptible to the anti-life equation. No one takes this in the context of the storyline.
Right. A lot of people just fail to do that, and a lot of people seem to think that Superman's this like super gentle guy. Like, no, he's a super strong alien from outer space that can fly and has all these powers. He's going to use them to fight off evil. Like you read in comics when he fights aliens, he can definitely get brutal. He can fend for his own. So why any different from the movies?
I don't know. Then my other favorite scene. So after the Superman part, I'm like, how is he going to top this? And then the Flash goes back in time in one of the, and no, I believe that this was one of the VFX shot they did during the pandemic in like a relatively short period of time. So I'm watching this and I'm like, you did all this in that short amount of time?
And it was the first scene, one of the first scenes that the studio cut when Zack left, and which is so bizarre to me. So, yeah, and it won the fan cheer moments.
Now we could say that Zack Snyder's Justice League is an Oscar-winning movie. So there you go.
I mean, it says it on IMDb, so I mean...
Yeah, it says on IMDb, and it was an Oscar category. Ipso facto, it's an Oscar-winning movie.
Yeah.
And rumor is that Zack actually did do an acceptance speech, but they didn't televise it.
I haven't heard that. I have to go and look into that because I didn't know if that was gonna be. I wasn't even sure if he was there, so I'll have to go and look into that honestly.
But I also love, in addition to the fan cheer moment, Army of the Dead won the like fan best movie, which was another underrated movie.
Out of the two that Zack could have won, I was surprised he got that because like I enjoyed Army of the Dead. It's not necessarily his best work, but I did really enjoy it. But the fact that fans came together and made that one win too, I'm just like, okay. Yeah, they underestimated Zack's fan base quite a bit.
And like the general fan base, because I don't think they anticipate. What I love is that they clearly didn't anticipate how popular the Snyder Cut was going to be.
Right.
Like I remember Zack said they wanted to just release it without any of the VFX study. He's like, I would set it on fire before I do that.
I mean, yeah, I mean, he knew that. Well, he did it in such a brilliant way because in the interview he explained, I believe it was on the Hollywood Reporter, where he explained that predicament he was in. It's like they wanted just to release it as is, just to appease the fans. Zack's like, no, because I know what you're trying to do here. You're trying to get it released without VFX, so you can say, hey, it wasn't all that good, but you're also trying to get the monkey off your back and just say like, oh, see, we released it. So you're trying to justify yourselves while also getting these fans off your back. I'm not willing to do you that favor. You either let me finish this movie or I'm out. It's like, well, we can't have that. So they let them finish the movie and gave them all that freaking money to do it. And I'm glad they did. I'm glad they gave them the money.
Yeah, because now we actually have a Justice League movie instead of just an Avengers movie with Justice League skins.
Pretty much. Yeah. That's exactly what the other one was.
Plus, here's the thing. It wasn't even a pure Avengers movie. It was a mutant movie because it's like there were some parts that were clearly not Avengers like quality, it's Avengers 1 because I know that I'm of the opinion that Joss Whedon is like a supremely like overhyped director. Like the only two things that I really enjoyed from him were like Avengers 1 and like obviously Firefly. That's it.
Oh yeah, Firefly's great.
Oh yeah, I really just can't like go against Firefly, but it's like Avengers 2 was like where I started to think maybe this guy isn't talented.
Right. I mean, I liked Avengers 2 when it came out in theaters, but like at the time, yeah, it definitely showed he was a little bit overrated for sure.
Plus, when I found out about what the Age of Ultron story actually was in the comics, I was like, oh, this is way better.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they did it in What If. So I'm like, okay, why couldn't we get this?
Well, because they wanted to fit in such a short runtime, and you can't fit that whole story in a short movie. So I mean, that's the problem you have with big comic book events being adapted into movies, is that a lot of studios are too afraid to approach that long runtime, and they're too afraid of all the different elements you have to put into a movie to make that kind of story work.
Yeah.
Because that's why for such a long time it was very hard in general to adapt comic book stories, because comic books and graphic novels, people don't understand. There's so many moving parts that make up a graphic novel. There's so many moving parts that make a comic book story cohesive and readable. And it's very hard to replicate that into a movie. That's why I always advocate that if you're going to do a long, extensive, and very impactful story from the comic books, make it into a TV show instead. Because you're going to get more of the elements that way. I mean, the only exception to that I'll say is the Watchmen movie by Zack Snyder, the Ultimate Cut, because he did pretty much everything he could with that movie, and including almost all the elements of the book. I mean, it took 3.5 hours to do it, but he did it. But yeah, it's very hard to do that.
Cut for that. I want to.
Oh, the Ultimate Cut's so good. It includes all the Black Freighter stuff, and it's essentially the Watchmen book on screen. Of course, aside from the change at the end that you had to make due to, runtime issues, but it's basically the book, and it's fantastic.
Awesome. I will definitely check that out. Yeah, I think what's kind of funny is that the one movie of Zack's that no one criticizes is 300. And it's funny. My mom just showed me that, and she didn't even know it was a comic book movie. And I'm like, oh yeah, it is.
Yeah, I mean, I have the hardcover book. I have all the different individual issues. It's a great story, and they couldn't have adapted it any better, honestly. I mean, it's a short story as it is, so like it's easier to adapt into a movie. So they added a couple different things, but the way they adapted is just chef's kiss.
Yeah. Now, here's the topic that I really want your opinion on. So recently the Variety article came out that Zaslav wanted to severely reform DC. Now, I want to get your take on what you think that entails for us in terms of Snyder fans and in terms of just DC fans in general.
Yeah, so that's been a whole different can of worms over the past couple of weeks, because I mean, most of us, especially Snyderverse fans, have been very much anticipative of this merger, right? Because it offered different possibilities. We were like, okay, which different executives are going to come? Which executives are going to go? Of course, we're seeing that Jason Kilar is gone, and Sarnoff, thank goodness, is gone.
Yeah.
But of course, Toby Emmerich is staying for the time being because his contract expires in this year, so we don't know exactly what happens there. But that whole totally, what's the word he used? Not rebooting, but he used the word of retrofitting or revitalizing DC.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. It's like, what was the word?
Is it revitalize? I think is what it was.
Something like that.
Yeah. So when overhaul. Yeah. So overhaul can mean a whole bunch of different things. When people hear overhaul, a lot of people immediately think reboot, which it can definitely lean towards that. But what I think is more possible is that instead of just rebooting everything and starting completely from scratch, what I think would be a terrible decision.
Yeah.
I think what they mean is that they are going to look at all they have in upcoming movies and upcoming announced movies and stuff and things that are in pre-production. And they're going to really go through everything and decide, okay, do we want to change things in a certain direction? Because if you look at DC films over the past 5 years, there's been no direction.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
There's been no overarching story. You've had individual movies, which some have been good, like The Batman, for instance.
Aquaman,
Shazam, okay. And then you have like 184, then you have Birds of Prey, and then Justice League I kind of throw in there because that was also them. So you have, and then the Suicide Squad, it's hit and miss for people. I wasn't a fan of it, but
I enjoyed parts of it. The only thing I could not complete Peacemaker. I watched 3 episodes in and I was like, oh my gosh.
I didn't watch it just because I had no interest.
The only part I did watch at the end was when the Justice League shows up. That's it.
Yeah, I watched that clip, but overall, there's been like no general direction for the DC universe. And so I think David Zaslav saw that. And I think he's also been really paying attention to how fans have been interacting with DC content and how the fan discourse has been, because that's all basically what you're doing is you're trying to earn money, and how you earn money is by appealing to an audience and trying to please them with entertainment. That's how you make money. You bring them to the theater, you bring them into your streaming services to watch things that they want to watch, right? And so I think he's definitely been paying attention to that. So I lean more towards the side of some things being restored in DC. Like, I would really much hope, with all the hype that Zack has been getting over the past couple of years, that Zaslav would let Zack come in and either make a JL2 or JL2 and 3 and finish his story and move on from there, because that's a big cliffhanger that you left it on with Zack Snyder's Justice League.
And they can do it as a series too. It doesn't have to be a movie.
Exactly. It could be an HBO Max exclusive. It could be an Elseworlds thing. And so I don't necessarily see it as a total reboot, because here's the problem with reboots. DC has experienced so many reboots, both in comics and movies over the past like decade. And so, like, for instance, you had Superman Returns with Brandon Routh. That was a reboot, basically. Well, sort of a continuation, but also a reboot of Christopher Reeve's Superman. And then Man of Steel was a reboot of that. And then if you were to reboot Superman again, I mean, Superman's already kind of an interesting character to deal with anyway. And
people like this version of Superman. That's the other part there.
Like, many people who even hate Zack Snyder will say, hey, I like Henry Cavill as Superman. So Henry Cavill's a popular pick for the character. And then you also have, for instance, Gal Gadot's Wonder Woman. You're not going to recast her. You have way too many fans of hers.
No,
you're not going to recast Jason Momoa. Jason Momoa's Aquaman. He's already too popular. Zachary Levi, I could see being in that same category somewhat, but he hasn't been as impactful as the other ones have.
He's only had one movie so far. So
right. The main reason he's popular is because it's Zachary Levi. He has
I love that personality. He's so good.
Yeah, he's funny. But you have all these different versions of the characters, and if you were to reboot everything, you'd have to win fans over again, start from scratch again. And when you start a new universe, people are tentative to go into a theater, especially if it's just now being rebooted again. So you're gonna have to win fans over all over again, and that's a tough, tall order. And I think Zaslav knows that. So I think he's thinking, okay, we'll maybe revamp some things, but keep familiarity to keep people who are invested in the old invested in the new. Yeah, so overhaul does not need to mean reboot, basically, is what I'm saying.
Plus, he's overhauling all of DC, not just the movies. But what I think, the way I see it happening is that I think he'll do the Snyderverse stuff at the very least to like buy time until he can more firmly establish what they're going to do. Just dump it on HBO Max and say, okay, the Batman, Deathstroke, because and you look at the original Snyderverse plan, there's like years of content that they can just do that and then like have time to do their stuff.
Which I'd be surprised if they venture beyond the 2 JL sequels. Honestly, I feel like we might be past the time of a Cyborg movie. Sadly, we might be past the point. Batman, possibly, if Zack can convince Ben to come back and do his own little story. I'd love to see that. I mean, as a Batman fan, I'm a huge
Deathstroke.
I love that. Deathstroke, you could definitely use them.
I want to Deathstroke is like my number 2 favorite DC villain, my number 1 being Darkseid.
Yeah, I mean, they're both absolutely fantastic. So you could do some small things here and there. Whether or not you'd get the full-on Snyderverse restored, that I feel like is a tall order. Like Mad Love. Right, like Mad Love's not going to happen with Jared Leto and Harley, or in what's her name for Harley Quinn?
Margot Robbie.
Margot Robbie. You're not going to have that, unfortunately. And then, it's bringing me food in here. But there's some things that just we'll never see, unfortunately. But you can have some small things here and there, and that's what could be included in the overhaul.
Yeah, and then as this applies to the comics, I really think that one of the overhaul parts is they're going to try and get a lot of their talent back, because let's face it, over the past couple of years, DC lost a lot of its top talent, and replacing them with people that either don't understand the characters or just don't know how to write a comic book in general. So
yeah, I mean, they still have some, like they have like Mark Waid and Tom Taylor there that are pretty decent, but yeah, you don't have Scott Snyder really do much there anymore. He's doing more of the Amazon stuff with Comixology. Greg Capullo is doing a lot of his own things, as well as stuff with Scott Snyder. Jim Lee is doing covers here and there, but he's the DC Comics president, so like he's busy with other things. But there's a lot of, like, for instance, one of the things that kind of bugs me with modern comics today is you're seeing a lot more very basic comic art in stories. Yeah, you're seeing a lot less impactful art. Like, you have Dan Moore. Dan Moore is fantastic. You have Jock, who does things pretty well. You have Andy Kubert. Like, you have a couple of artists here and there that really stand out. But in a lot of other stories, I mean, even Victor Bogdanovich, is an up-and-comer who really does a good job of imitating Greg Capullo's art style. So you have a couple of different people. But for the most part, you have a lot of art in books that's just kind of, and that's no offense to artists out there. Like, I'm a striving artist myself. But there's not as much impactful DC art out there. And as far as writers, you're absolutely right. They've lost a lot of different talent. And one of the things that Zaslav did say early on before the merger was he wanted to reconnect with talent.
Yes.
Right. He wanted like mend relationships with talent. So like you said, it could definitely apply to the comic industry as well.
And maybe they'll have DC stop replacing your main characters, because that didn't work out well for Marvel when they did that with All New, All Different. So
right.
That's my problem with Tom Taylor, because he replaces Clark Kent with his son, John Kent, who I can't stand as a character, particularly as he's written now, because I find him annoying. And just my problem with John Kent boils down to that panel of him like protesting climate change while there's a Kraken attacking.
Yeah,
and
that's
here's the
definitely
problem.
a weird.
You can't do that when you exist in a universe where there are characters that could solve the climate thing like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a problem too, because like I like Tom Taylor in general, but with his Superman, I definitely do kind of agree that there's some things that are missteps. Like he makes his Superman way too soft on things. Like for instance, they had the story of this giant sea creature that was approaching the shores, and they're like, oh, let's not make Superman fight the creature, let's make him understanding and compassionate, which there's room for that to some extent, but I feel like that's every other book. He's just trying to talk people down and trying to reason with people instead of using his Superman like powers, which is why people buy comic books in the first place, to see that kind of stuff. I don't necessarily need action every panel or whatnot, but you need to have a good balance of good dialogue, good philosophy, as well as good action to draw people into a Superman story. And I think sometimes Tom Taylor somewhat struggles with that balance. And there's a couple other characters too, like they're basically trying to replace the entire Justice League with the Death of Justice League event coming up.
And I love the reaction when they announced that. They're like, okay, they're coming back. And then DC announces that, and we're like, no one's surprised.
Yeah, I mean, you can't just forever kill off Wonder Woman, Superman, Bruce Wayne's Batman. Like you just can't keep them gone forever.
Like this way, of those characters, I think Batman's the most safe from getting killed, because they're not going to kill their cash cow. Never.
Right. They're not going to do that. They wouldn't do that. I mean, Superman's also one that's pretty safe. Wonder Woman. I mean, Wonder Woman's universe is definitely expanded, so you can definitely do other things with that Themyscira world. But you are absolutely right. There's some people that are safe as far as the characters, but I don't know. There's just some things that the comics are doing that I both love and also have gripes with.
Yeah, and speaking of Wonder Woman, I think she, and this is not necessarily a ding on the current DC regime, this has been going on for years. Wonder Woman's the one like character that I think is super famous, but doesn't have that many well-known and good stories.
Right. She has War of the Gods. She also has what's the book that I have? I have one of the books. The Hykatia, I believe it is. I think
that's the one where she fights Batman and destroys him.
Yes, exactly. And he's like his face on the cover with her boot on his face. And you also have the Wonder Woman Origins book, The Legend of Wonder Woman, I think.
Yeah, there's the Circle, Down to Earth, Gods and Mortals, Blood. But she like this way. Batman and Superman have more like well-known storylines than she does.
Right, exactly. Like as far as comparatively, Batman and Superman have like this many stories. Wonder Woman's like down here.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny because she's like the most famous like DC, the female DC character, which I owe majorly to the fact that she had one good movie.
Yeah, I mean, true. Her popularity definitely skyrocketed from that movie, as well as her appearance in BVS. And like with Wonder Woman, there's so many different stories you can tell. Like it derives all from this ancient mythology. You can use all these different beings, all these different gods, and they have gone in that direction to some extent. But you can do so much more with her if you just expand her world just a little bit and not be afraid to just put her in different situations. I feel like there's so much potential for her stories there. And I mean, they're doing some stuff now, but I feel like there's even more potential in that.
Yeah, and they did put her in interesting and new situations when we had like that Superman Wonder Woman series, because you have like my favorite scene in that book is when Apollo, the god of the sun, like blasts Superman with sunlight, and then Superman goes, "You don't know that much about me, do you?" I'm like,
that is a good part.
That's not going to end very well.
Yeah, not very well at all. I do also like the fact that Wonder Woman got a lot of focus in the Dark Knight's Metal and Dark Knight's Death Metal storylines. because it really showed how powerful she can be.
Mhm.
And plus, like, she just had a boss design. I mean, thanks.
I
Greg
love the
Capullo
blue
for-
highlights in the hair. It just looks so good.
Yes, that was such a good take. I have multiple different covers for a lot of those issues, especially like the foil covers by Greg Capullo. Oh,
Mhm.
seriously, give me a foil cover by Greg Capullo any day of the week. I don't care what story it is. Just give me a Greg Capullo cover and I will collect it. That's
Yeah,
where I stand on that.
Yeah, there are a few like artists you have to get these special covers by. There's Greg Capullo, there's Jason Fabok, there's Jim Lee,
Yeah.
but it's like he's definitely on my list as like the top like comic book artist like of all time, particularly from metal and death metal. But
yes,
speaking of death metal, the one issue I have with comic book events in DC is very guilty of this, but more so with Marvel, is the fact that you need to read like 20 tie-ins in order to understand the full storyline, particularly when you have like there was King in Black for Marvel and then Death Metal for DC.
Right. There's a lot of tie-ins. It's the idea is, of course, to make as much money as possible, spread it out to where you have to buy different issues of different storylines, get exposure for different writers and artists and stuff. It's a whole ploy to do it, and like it can make it fun to explore the world, but it's definitely a money-making tactic for sure, which can be kind of annoying.
Yeah, but my issue with it is that I understand the whole money-making thing, and there's a way to do it. My problem is when they hide major plot points in the tie-ins.
Yes.
So I'm like,
exactly.
I'm reading a trade of metal, and I'm like, when did this happen?
Right, and then it shows like in a little box, like, see this issue for that. And it's like, wait, hold on. You can't just throw that at me. And...
Yeah, like what? That's why I love like those Earth One books because they're all one volume, pretty much. And it's like, okay, so Larry, that Superman Earth One book pretty much is Man of Steel.
Oh yeah, it basically it is. I mean, the only issue I have with that Earth One book is when he's like trying out for all these different sports teams at the beginning, and yet nobody knows who he is. It's like, okay, no, if you're in the modern age, you're trying out for all these different teams and you're excelling in all these things, you're gonna get public coverage. Like that's gonna get you on the news. You're gonna be not a nobody. That's my only issue, just because I don't think they really look at the sports information world of things. It's like, oh, sports, you're good at it, and they don't really talk about it. No, there's channels on TV specifically for analyzing athletes like this. So
yeah, exactly. Last question. So what would you say is the worst comic book of all time?
Ooh, worst comic of all time. That's man, that's a tough question. I mean, because first off, I haven't read every single comic known to man, so that's the worst one I've ever read though was oh gosh, it was recently where I didn't like it. There was shoot. Oh, I know what it was, and it's unfortunate. It's one of the older Daredevil comics. Unfortunately, it was illustrated by John Romita Jr., who's another one of my favorites. But it was the storyline where it's basically like, in Michael Bay's Transformers movie, how they were trying to make all the machines on Earth turn to Transformers and destroy mankind.
Yeah.
There's a similar thing happening in this one storyline where a lot of these like different technological devices are turning into robots and like going all crazy, and Daredevil's just laying on the pavement somewhere, like contemplating death and life and all of that. I read that and I was like, not a fan of that story. But of course, there's also, we talked about earlier of All-Star Batman and Robin, the issue where they lure Green Lantern into a room that's fully painted yellow. I'm just like, okay, that's pretty bad.
Or where Batman makes out with Black Canary after lighting some dudes on fire.
Yeah, that one's, and then he says like, keep the mask on, it's better.
Okay.
And then in the first issue, when he takes Vicky Vale out to the circus and he's like, I've been eyeing this boy for a while. And she's like, what do you mean eyeing him? He's like, I have an eye for talent. It's like, okay, now you're making Batman just sound creepy.
Like, you're making him sound like a problem. Yeah, exactly.
Seriously. I mean, there's a lot of different bad ones out there for sure, but it's hard to narrow it down.
One that comes to mind for me is that John Ridley Superman story where they had him in prison and then the guards did things to him in prison.
That's a great point. Yeah, that's
I'm like, oh, who and I say this all the time when that stuff comes up. Who is approving these stories?
Yeah, someone someone looked at that and said, "Yep, that's good."
I'm like, that's part of what Zaslav was talking about when he's saying like Superman has been allowed to languish for too long. I'm like, yeah,
I mean, literally languish.
literally languish. But I'm like, in terms of Superman, that would be it. That would be the one that I say is the most.
I had forgotten about that one, so yeah, I full-heartedly agree with you on that one. That one's just bad.
So here's one that was rumored to have been proposed but didn't come out. Did you hear about this? So in the 90s, they wanted to make like Wonder Woman's version of like Dark Knight Returns and like the death of Super. You know what I'm referring to.
Yeah.
You know what I'm referring to, that Mark Millar book. Yeah. I'm like, again, who actually he was joking, but DC thought he was serious. And I'm like, that would referring to
if he gets the point. If he gets to the point where you make a full-fledged pitch of the story, regardless if you're like serious or joking or not, like at that point, you made the decision to say like, hey, I'm willing to put this out there. Like you've made that decision.
Where the first 10 panels would be Wonder Woman being violated. And I'm like, okay. You
have to be in a special mindset in order to get to that kind of storytelling.
That's an extremely Black Label book. Like, oh gosh.
Like that's Black Label plus.
That's Black Label XX Black Label.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh geez. I'm like, who thought that was a good idea?
Apparently Mark Millar did.
Actually, he was joking. Well, actually, Mark Millar, I have my own problems with him because he writes a lot of his Marvel stuff. I'm like, why?
Yeah, I've only had one time where I've wanted to buy a Mark Millar book, and that's one he did with Greg Capullo called Reborn. And I'm only getting it because of Greg Capullo, right? Mm-hmm. That's the only reason I'm going to get that book, because of his art. But yeah, that story, I'm glad it was never made. Very glad it was never made, because then it would have been a very dark stain on the comic book industry.
You could have given Wonder Woman that edgy story. That's the interesting part. You didn't have to do that to her in the book in order for her to have an edgy storyline.
Right. Like, heck, there's an edgy storyline from Black Label for Wonder Woman that did incredibly well.
Oh, yes.
Wonder Woman Dead Earth. Daniel Warren Johnson knocked it out of the park with that. And it's a dark, gritty Wonder Woman story. Easily my favorite Wonder Woman story of all time. And you can do stuff like that with Wonder Woman a lot. And what I love about that book, actually, I'm kind of fanboying on Daniel Warren Johnson for a second, is he draws Wonder Woman, and most Wonder Woman comics depict her as like this perfect physique, goddess looking. She's gorgeous, right? Mm-hmm. But this one, her hair is like matted and tangled, like she's bruised and like scraped up and dirty. Like it's a war-torn Wonder Woman, and it makes sense.
Yes.
So again, I love that book. So
that story, that part of the book where she's fighting people with Superman's spine.
My gosh! I remember when I talked about this book with Wonder Meg on a stream. I told her that, like, sometimes, a lot of times Wonder Woman has the lasso of truth, right? But in this book, she has a lasso of truth, justice in the American way.
That's good.
With his spine and his skull, it's like, dude. I don't know how you can get more metal than that. You honestly can't.
Oh, I can. There was that scene in King in Black where Venom combines Thor's hammer and Silver Surfer's surfboard into a giant axe.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Dude.
I read that and I'm like, okay, I love you, Donny Cates, so much. Jeez.
Oh, my gosh. That is
I could go on for like hours on that book, because it's like... He's another character that I think doesn't get enough attention.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that for sure.
But so final question. Now, who would you say is the best comic book writer of all time? In other words, who's your favorite comic book writer?
My favorite comic book writer, oh man, I would have to say it's between three people. It's between Alan Moore, Frank Miller, and Scott Snyder.
All right, there you go.
Because like Alan Moore is Alan Moore. I mean, Watchmen, V for Vendetta, his Swamp Thing run, his book of
Superman.
Whatever happened to the Man of Tomorrow, and he's just done such great stuff. Then of course Frank Miller, all the Batman stuff, 300, Sin City, Xerxes. The other one is this other book that I really want to get called The Holy Terror, which is an unknown from him, and a lot of stuff that he's done, and just illustration wise. And Scott Snyder, like, a lot of people hear Scott Snyder and they think Batman, right,
Mhm.
from New 52, but he's done so many
Justice
other things
League.
from that. I mean, Justice League, yes, I have it with Jorge Jimenez up there,
Yes.
but he's also done so many things outside of DC. Like, in fact, I actually just got my foil cover for his Comixology original, We Have Demons.
Sweet.
It's fantastic. He's done stuff with Comixology. He's done stuff with the other one was Image Comics, this one comic called Undiscovered Country. Noctera, exactly.
I also have Undiscovered Country right there.
That one's great. I have volume 1, and that's the only one that I have. I need to get the other
Yeah.
ones, but he's does so many great things. He's constantly writing, constantly making new things. So yeah, between Alan Moore, Frank Miller, and Scott Snyder, and I'd have to really debate with myself for like 5 hours in order to figure out like which one I feel like goes out on top.
Mhm.
So
if I have to pick 3, it's Jeff Johns. I know, separate art from artist.
yeah,
Frank
right.
Miller, because
Of
of all the reasons we've talked about.
Mhm.
And the third one, if I really have to pick, in terms of, I would have to say it's really Ed Brubaker, because of his Captain America run, where you have like the Winter Soldier and like the Winter Soldier becoming Captain America.
Right. That's definitely fair. I can definitely agree with that for sure. That's a good one.
Yeah. And in certain contexts, Tom Taylor, because you have like Injustice, you have Deceased. I don't think he's a good Superman writer. Like, I really think it was a mistake for them to change Superman's like motto, because I'm like, why? There was really no reason to change that. So I'm like,
I can agree with that.
I get their reason for doing it, but you're taking a character that was founded by Americans and fought Nazis in World War II and changing it. That's like when they made Captain America a Hydra agent.
Right. It totally goes against a lot of what his history has said. But with Tom Taylor also, I also mentioned earlier on his story, Batman the Detective, from this past year. Very fantastic. One of my favorite new Batman stories out there.
I'll check that out. Yeah, he's one of those guys where it depends on what story you put him in. Because if you put him in an Elseworld storyline, heck yeah.
Just let him loose.
Yeah, let him loose, because he will kill everyone. That's the funny part about it. It's become a joke with Tom Taylor. He doesn't care. He will kill everyone.
No one is safe.
And then my sleeper pick is that if they let him come back for the comic book series, it'd be Zack Snyder. So I think because I think it'd be pretty cool to see the Snyderverse start as a comic book, and then if it's popular, put it in the movie.
Yeah, I always have said this, like, Zack Snyder, I feel like if his stories and his movies were adapted in comics, they'd be praised by the comic community, right?
Yeah.
I feel like with his visual ideas, right? If you pair the right artist with him, like for instance, if you get someone like either Greg Capullo, Jason Fabok, Jim Lee, Gary Frank.
Yes.
Like one of those guys, right? If you get any one of those paired up with Zack Snyder on a comic story, I feel like it'd be just absolutely fantastic.
Plus, it would definitely sell out. I mean, one of my favorite things, we covered Final Crisis on the show because of when he put it like strategically in the clip, and then you saw the absolute Final Crisis like sold out. They should just tell Zack. They should send Zack all their comics and say, just put these strategically throughout your videos.
Then they'll sell like crazy.
That's exactly. True. That I just saved DC. There you go.
Yeah, if Batman v Superman the Ultimate Edition were to have been a comic book first, like a comic storyline, people would have flipped their lid because they would have been able to see the inner dialogue of things, especially like the Martha scene. They would have been able to see the inner dialogue of Batman. It would have worked for them, but they're like, no, it's in the movie. I don't like it. Like, oh, shut up.
Technically, it was a comic book beforehand, but
technically it was, yes. But if you like the exact story, right?
Yeah. The one criticism I've seen of BVS that I kind of can see the merit of, I don't agree with it, but I can see the merit of is like they cram too many comic book storylines into BVS because you have Dark Knight Returns and the death of Superman. But I was fine with it because I'm one of the guys that when I saw that the Snyder Cut was 4 hours, I was like, yes.
Yeah, I mean, I love being able to
I've seen it 8 times, so.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those, like, I don't care how long a movie is. If it's good, it's good.
Yeah, if it's good. Because this thing, with the Snyder Cut, it doesn't feel like 4 hours. It feels like 2 hours.
It's like the same thing with the Batman movie. When I first heard it was 3 hours long, I was like, yes, great. It's going to be a detective story. It's going to be, drawn out, and it's going to be, following different paths of clues and stuff. Like, it makes sense. Like, a person should not be deterred by a movie's runtime. Does the story warrant the runtime is the big question. If you see it for yourself and you decide yes or no, then that's that,
And I love all those people that complain that Zack's movies are too long are the same people that watch Lord of the Rings. I'm like,
Yeah,
those movies are
editions
very
too.
long. Yeah, and
Yeah.
I'm like, wait a second, those movies feel long. Like that's an event to watch one of that's a day event to watch one of those.
I mean, they're good, but yeah, they're
They're
definitely
good.
they feel very drawn out for sure.
Yeah, so
Especially the ending of Return of the King.
yeah, exactly. But that's another one of those like criticisms of Snyder that I'm like, okay, that's unwarranted because it's like it's hypocrite. There's a lot of hypocrisy in the anti-Snyder crowd. I feel.
Oh yeah, there always is. There always is for sure.
In like any crowd too, because no one's ever going to admit that they're wrong or something like that.
Everybody sees their own point of view and then they ignore the fallacies in their own argument. It is what it is.
All right, I think that's a good place to leave it. Dawson, thank you so much for coming on the show. You're always welcome.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate the invite. This is a very fun time.
Anytime. We should definitely do another episode together. It was very enjoyable.
Absolutely, 100%. In fact, it's good that we had it this time because I was actually spent some time finishing the script for my graphic novel. So I was like, you know what, I'm finishing this, going on a podcast talking about comics. Perfect. This is a good day.
I'll see what your book about.
Oh yeah, so I've already done a couple different comics. I'm an illustrator first and foremost, so I've done a couple different things. Like I've done this book called Savage: The Legend of Blue Raven. I've done Vine Lord, both written by either my dad or my younger brother, right? But I'm doing this new book. Yes, this is my Instagram right there. But I'm doing this new book called Glitch, and I've been working on the script for a while, and it's going to be a full-fledged graphic novel. And I decided not to do this one in individual issues because it's just such a interesting story, in my opinion. And it's basically like combine elements of iRobot with Will Smith, elements of Bicentennial Man with Robin Williams, and a teeny hint of Terminator, as well as just some philosophical themes, right? It's going to be very, very character-oriented, very much slightly sci-fi, but mostly just family and emotional drama sort of thing. And I'm very, very excited for people to see it. I'm going to start the art very, very soon and hopefully get the book done within the year. That's optimistic, I think, because there's a lot to illustrate, but, I'm very, very excited for it. So.
Sounds fantastic. We need more original ideas out there so people can have options besides Marvel and DC.
Right, exactly. Indie comics are always very, very fun to explore. Like, for instance, this past year, I was able to interview comic author Dave Baker. Yes, Keanu Reeves Berserk. I have that too.
Yes.
So freaking good. But yeah, Dave Baker was one I interviewed. He released a book for Dark Horse Comics this past year called Everyone is Tulip, and I interviewed him and the artist Nicole Gu. And they had some great stuff. Like there's stuff like that all the time. You just look at different places like Dark Horse Comics, Boom Studios, Image Comics. There's another one that I'm neglecting to mention, but there's so many different places out there where they have just such interesting stories. And I highly, highly advise people to, as well as Marvel and DC, go check out those as well, because you have a lot of different talent out there that oftentimes gets overshadowed by a lot of stuff in the bigger industries.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a lot of more original ideas because there's more freedom there. So you can have like more, you can have a Batman-like character that straight up kills everyone for fun.
Yeah, and that's freaking awesome.
That's why we love Batfleck. So
yeah, there you go. Exactly.
So one more thing before I let you go. I just noticed on your Instagram you're a fan of the Lego Star Wars game, the new one. I myself am a connoisseur of that. That's like the best Lego game of all time, I think.
I've been binge playing that for like the past 2 weeks, ever since it came out. Like I've been playing it every night since I got back from vacation this past weekend, and oh my gosh, so many freaking memories from the original one, because they had the original prequel trilogy one, then they had the complete saga, then they had the Force Awakens, which is a sad little stain on Lego Star Wars, if I do say so myself.
And then Episode 8 showed up, and that was even more of a stain.
Yeah, for sure. And then now you have this game, which is just, honestly, it's any Star Wars fan's dream. Like I have the Mandalorian character pack, the Rogue One character pack, the classic Obi-Wan Kenobi skin they can get. There's just so many things in it. The one thing that I don't like about this new Lego Star Wars game is they don't have a customizable character part yet.
That's not in there?
They don't have a customizable character thing yet. which
My-
is a big miss.
Yeah, and my only issue is that there's no Clone Wars like missions.
Yeah, and you also need people like Ahsoka. You need Ahsoka in there. You need to get some Clone Wars and Bad Batch people in there for sure, because
Bad Batch it is a pack that's coming in May, I believe. So we're gonna have the Bad Batch.
Nice.
Like, yes.
So yeah, you have all these different characters and different skins and lightsabers and stuff. Like, why not have a customization thing? Because this could be the most customizable Lego characters of all time if you have it. So, Lego Star Wars, or I guess Warner Bros. Games, or whoever's in charge of this, if you're listening, do it now.
Yeah. I will say my favorite part of the Mando character is how Baby Yoda is like right there and the little hover thing. I'm like, yeah.
And there's a fun glitch with that too. I don't know if it's been patched yet, but if you play as Mando, you can utilize the extra character thing that Grogu is and add on a character into that. So what you could do is you could duplicate different characters. Like you can make a bunch of different droids for the Trade Federation and then change your character to Count Dooku and just leave this massive army of droids, which is really cool. I don't know if they've patched it yet, but if they haven't, I highly recommend you guys try that out because it's, oh my gosh, it's so
Is that the glitch I keep seeing where there's like 80 clone troopers behind someone?
Yes, that's the glitch. And I've done it. It's so freaking cool. I've done it with Mandalorians. I've done it like just a ton of Mandos, just following behind like Jango Fett or Mando or something like that.
And on that note, I really want to go to Mandalore. I'm like, come on. This game is so big, but it's also so small at the same time.
I mean, you can go to all these different planets. Like, I imagine once Mandalorian Season 3 is finished, they'll add, like, Mandalorian Season 2 stuff into the game. Mm-hmm. And they'll eventually add Mandalorian Season 3 stuff. It'll be a constant DLC hub, honestly. Mm-hmm. At least I hope that it is, because why wouldn't you? And you can just constantly buy new things for it. But yeah, I feel like there's a whole lot of opportunity with that game to just expand and explore new things with Star Wars.
Yeah, they're 100%. I'm like, I want a Lego Revan, just saying.
Dude, all the Knights of the Old Republic in that game? Yes, I need it.
We are getting the remake, which there's only a matter of time before they recanonize Darth Revan, so I'm just saying.
Yes. Thank you.
Yes.
I still need a Darth Revan like live action movie. I still need that.
Yes, played by Keanu Reeves.
Yeah, I mean, before he gets too old to do it, please, somebody.
Oh, he'll still do it. You kidding me? He'll still do it.
Yeah, he'll be doing these kind of things until he's like 70.
That'd be great. Really old John Wick. He has like miniguns in the wheelchair.
Or he has like the walker that he like lifts up and it's a turret.
On that note, now we're gonna let you guys go. Again, Dawson, thanks for coming on. You're always welcome, brother.
Absolutely, much appreciated, man. It was a fun time being on here.
All right, guys, stay heroic. See y'all.